Lord, we're thankful for the privilege of having class today. Will you please strengthen the students, the physical students and video students, that they would be encouraged with the evidence for the Bible today. And we thank you for the truth of your word in the book of Genesis. And we pray this for Jesus' sake. Amen. What is the strongest argument for evolution? Yeah, if you don't believe in it, you're very ignorant. You're very ignorant. That's the best argument. And how would you respond to that argument? Yes? So the strongest argument for evolution is you're very ignorant if you don't believe in evolution. And how would you respond to that argument? What is it? You're more ignorant? I'm rubber and you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off me, goes back to you.
There are many intelligent creationist people who are scientists.
Sure. So there are many intelligent creationists, scientists like who? There's no such thing as a creationist scientist who's intelligent. It's not impossible.
The man that invented the MRI.
Oh, sure. Like Dr. Damadian, inventor of the MRI. Yeah, see, I guess he's pretty smart, but he's probably the only one. Nobody else. So there's a list? Like who? I mean, obviously you can't really do science without believing in evolution.
If you look up Dr. Bergman's list on the internet, he has 3,000 people who are current Darwin skeptics.
Oh, 3,000 Darwin skeptics. Okay, that sounds like a lot of people. But no Nobel Prize winners, though. I mean, they certainly haven't.
Oh, no, there's lots of them.
Double-digit number Nobel Prize winners? Okay. Okay, I guess you could be intelligent. All right, yeah. All right, well, okay, well, I guess we won't go that argument anymore. So what's a good question to ask an evolutionist? The first question is that we suggested asking.
Is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, why is there something rather than nothing? That's a good question, and it's a simple question, too. Why is there something rather than nothing? Then we also saw that there's incredible fine-tuning in the universe. We saw 3 examples of irreducible complexity. Okay. What were the 3 examples we looked at?
One was a mousetrap, one was
Well, mousetrap is an illustration of what irreducible complexity is. It doesn't work unless all its parts are there. Blood clotting and butterflies. Okay, look at this alliteration. Blood clotting, butterflies. I don't know how to make the third one alliterated. What was the third one? The third one is actually the biggest problem. This third one is what convinced Dr. Antony Flew, the 20th century's most famous atheist, to become a theist. Non-life to life. Non-life to life is just an absolutely huge problem because the simplest self-replicating life form has 1,500 genes here, and the likelihood of all those coming to existence simultaneously is 10 to the 112,500th power, which is way more than the number of particles in the universe, which is only 10 to the 80. So anything above 10 to the 150 is not going to happen. It's impossible. And this is way, way above that, so this is a huge problem and very difficult to explain if you are an evolutionist. So that's why some of them are even saying stuff like, well, maybe aliens put it here. Then, of course, we don't know where the aliens came from. So this is a very big problem for them. So now we are going to be looking at, so we looked at the irreducible complexity problem, and we're going to be looking now at some problems with evolution here. Okay. A lot of these slides were made by David Cloud. They're very good, and some of them are made by Heather Swinson, and some of them are made by my wife. They're just very good, but so here are a few issues here. Now, the man that developed the system of class, we think we ended with this, the classification system, right, Linnaeus? So you have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, from the top to the bottom. What was that again? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay. And about where is the biblical kind? Genesis 1, God made creatures after their kinds. Where on this spectrum? About the family level. Yeah, about the family level is the biblical kind. The guy that developed it, Carolus Linnaeus, was a creationist. He wanted to find out what the kinds were to reveal the order in the universe. But now the different kinds are used as an argument for evolution. And the argument for evolution from the different kinds, or similarities. The argument is similarities among kinds proves evolution. Homo means similar, okay? And so similarity among kinds means that evolution happens. So you can see penguins, alligators, bats, and humans all have bones that have certain similarities in them. Therefore, they all evolved from one thing. So practically every biology textbook and natural history museum uses homology, these similar structures, as an evidence for evolution. And homology means creatures share limbs and organs that look similar, like a leg bone. You can see those different bones and a lot of differences, but certain similarities. And the similarities show that they all evolved from a similar creature. So Darwin here said, I should infer from analogy that probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from one primordial form. And biology textbook here, these homologous structures, so similar structures, provide evidence of a common ancestor. So what would you say to that? If similar structures, they must have evolved from one critter. Right? Okay, so yeah, just because something had a leg doesn't mean a common ancestor. Okay, so that's a simple way to put it. The argument is based entirely on evolutionary assumption. First, it assumes that evolution has a mechanism that can create anything. That's a definite, strong problem. Okay, and the founders of biological classification did not believe that homology points to evolution. Also, the limbs in creatures are more different than similar, and at the genetic level, the structures are not formed the same way. So those are a few of the problems here. First, the argument from homology is based entirely on the assumption that evolution is true. But similarity of structure could as easily point to common design as to common evolution. It would be very reasonable for the creator to use similar structures and processes in creatures created to live in the same environment. So for example, if you breathe air, and birds breathe air, and amphibians breathe air, it would be reasonable to give all of those creatures lungs. If they're all in the same environment, they have to do the same thing, right? So if you work on cars or different things, there's lots of gears and wheels and ball joints and switches and all kinds of different machines. So a wheel, for example, is used in roller skates, bicycles, carts, and cars. But does the fact that, and all those wheels are designed to do something. They go round and round, round and round, round and round. Okay, they go round and round, right? And that's very useful. Does that prove that roller skates evolved from bicycles, which evolved from carts, and then cars evolved from the bicycles, or something like that? Because they all have wheels, right? Common structure. So they must have all evolved from one thing, one common ancestor, right? They slowly, gradually.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to you? Yeah. No. So obviously, simply having a similar structure could as easily be common design as evolution of one from the other. If something's designed to do something in the same environment, why not make it the same? That is very reasonable. As Dr. Terry Mortensen said, roller skates, bikes, cars, trucks, buses, and trains all have wheels, but one is not the ancestor of the other. They're similar because intelligent human designers have all thought that wheels are a good way to move things on land. Slapping down eyes of various complexity on a chart and then drawing arrows from less complex to more complex does nothing to explain how eyes emerged. This shows that if you want to see, having an eye is a useful thing. So, and actually, those empty lines, you remember the empty lines here? Here we have the different critters and all these empty lines. The empty lines are actually a big problem. What we don't see in the fossil record is tons and tons of transitional forms, half insects, half whatever, half bird, half reptile, half mammal, half whatever. We don't actually see that. What we see is species appearing very suddenly with little or no change in the fossil record of their existence. And it's not clear that their descendants were better adapted than their predecessors. So that's what we actually see in the fossil record, not tons and tons of gradual forms. Darwin knew that the fossil record didn't provide evidence of all these missing links. There should be millions of missing links, not a handful of questionable ones. But there aren't millions of them. And while in Darwin's day, you could say, well, maybe we're going to discover them. There aren't enough fossils yet. We're going to find them later. Now we have an estimated 200 million fossils that have been found, 100 million invertebrates, a million vertebrates, a million plants. So we should have had lots of transitional forms by now, but we don't. So simply the fact that there's common design in things, common structures to exist in common environments, that does not prove anything. That just proves that a common wise designer gave similar structures to things that are designed to do the same thing. So homology is just assumption. And you wouldn't have to use that as an argument if you had real evidence for it. Now, the two classic mechanisms of Darwinism that we're supposed to evolve everything through are natural selection and genetic mutation. Okay? So natural selection and mutation are how we're supposed to get here. We're supposed to get everything simply by natural selection and mutation. But those are not sufficient mechanisms to go from goo to you via the zoo. First of all, natural selection might be able to select a certain beak size on a finch, a bird there, but it can't create a beak or create a finch. Okay? It can select a certain beak size, but it can't create a beak or create a finch. Mutations are overwhelmingly harmful and do not add the information to the DNA that would be required to create complex new structures. Darwinists won't allow a divine foot in the door, so then they have the problem, well, how are we going to do this by natural selection mutation? We already pointed out that the founders of the classification systems did not believe homology points to evolution. Linnaeus here was a creationist. He was the one who designed the system. Cuvier, founders of comparative anatomy, was a creationist. So it's ironic that modern scientists quote classification trees, comparative anatomy, and paleontology as an evidence for evolution, when the founding scientists of these subjects were strong supporters of biblical creation. Also, limbs and creatures actually have a lot of differences. So here, a penguin here has these different bones, but you can see their bones act quite differently. A bat's wing is very different from a human arm. And at the genetic level, the structures are not formed the same way. Biology textbook here said the limbs derive from the same structures in the embryo, but that is not correct. So for example, human fingers and frog digits. In humans, the ridges form first, then cell death divides the ridge into different regions to form fingers, toes. Not head, shoulders, knees, and toes, just fingers and toes. While in frogs, you have little buds, and the digits grow outward from the buds. So it comes out with, toes and fingers, as it were, but that's just because they're very useful in this real world to have toes and fingers. So they don't even develop the same way. So if they all evolved from the same thing, that would not be what you would expect. So homology offers zero evidence for evolution. Similar structures are at least as likely to give evidence of common designer as of evolution. Any comments, questions on... so somebody says, well, look, penguins and bats and other creatures all have these similar bones. There's all these similar structures, so that proves that they evolved from one another. What would you say to that? Homology. Everybody knows similar structures, evolution.
Structures are useful anywhere, all the time.
Okay, they're useful structures.
It's okay to use the same thing.
It's okay to use, so a common designer is a perfectly reasonable explanation. You could say, does the fact that cars and trains and roller skates have wheels prove that one evolved from the other? Or do they show common design? I think that's a good analogy, kind of makes the point. You're not getting anywhere with that. Well, let's talk about natural selection. Now, according to Darwin, natural selection was how evolution was supposed to take place. So in his book, he was Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. And by favored races, he did apply that to men too. So you had a lot of racism with Darwinism. But natural selection was how it was supposed to happen. And natural selection was survival of the fittest. So there are too many creatures, and so they're always struggling to survive. And because of the struggle, only the best adapted ones survive. So maybe the birds with larger beaks, moths with better camouflage, giraffes with longer necks, whatever. And over millions of years, this is supposed to give you evolution. So Darwin said, those individuals with the best genetic fitness for the environment will produce offspring that can more successfully compete in that environment. Thus, a subsequent generation will have a higher representation of this offspring, and the population will have evolved. So you select the ones that are most fit, and those are going to be more likely to make it through. So, for example, he went to the Galapagos Islands near South America, and he found many different finches. So there was different birds here. They were different colors, they had different beak sizes, and this was... Actually, he didn't actually use that as an argument for evolution, but later evolutionists did. And so they found this as an example of evolution. So there was a drought on the Galapagos Islands, and that made it so that small seeds, which the finches prefer, there weren't enough of them. And so they were forced to eat larger and tougher seeds. And the birds with larger beaks survived better in this situation, and birds with larger beaks became the majority. And this is evolution here, see, because now there are more birds with larger beaks and that have smaller beaks, and this shows that you can get new creatures from accumulation of small changes over great periods of time. What do you think about that? More birds with larger beaks. That shows Goody you via the zoo. That's right.
Same kind. They're birds to birds. They're not birds to some other creature.
The birds didn't become something else.
Right.
They're even still finches. They didn't even become like a parakeet or something, right? Okay. All right. Larger beaks.
Where do they draw the line
Well, these species is a very specific term now. Like with orchids, we went to the orchid thing. They have 20,000 species of orchids supposedly. So species, whatever you want to call it. But does a larger beak mean that you can just keep going? Like, can it keep going and going and going until you get a blue whale out of this thing, like its mouth? Or are there limits here? Was there any new information? Were there already large beaked birds before? There already were some. So we're not even getting any new information here, just the change in the percentage. And you'd think that the creator would actually put in the ability to survive in different environments in his creatures. So with natural selection, he emphasized the word natural, no design here, according to Darwin. His objective was to explain life apart from God. That was his objective. So blind process, no intelligence, no designer. Here's Dawkins again, our favorite 21st century atheist. Natural selection is the blind, unconscious process which Darwin discovered. Okay? We live in a universe that has no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Man is the result of a purposeless process. I don't know why he's smiling about that. Human beings arose as an accident. Here's Stephen Jay Gould, another famous evolutionist. Now, what are problems here? Well, natural selection can only explain minor variations. Okay? Larger beaks and smaller beaks. It's not going to get you from one kind to another kind. It might give you a different percentage of beaks, but it's not going to get you from one kind to another. Also, natural selection cannot build because they cannot change the DNA. It can't add information. So the DNA of those finches already had that variety in it to get different finches. But to go from a finch to being a blue whale, you're going to need some additional information in there. And natural selection can only select what's there. It's not giving you anything new. Just selecting what's there. It's kind of like if you had if you committed a crime and you had a lineup of guys and you were the witness, you're supposed to select which one committed the crime. You can't select a guy that's not there. You know what I mean? This is what you've got. These guys are all lined up. You have to pick one. You can't make your own person that's not there. Natural selection can only pick out of what's already there. Also, natural selection cannot select something that wouldn't benefit the creature's immediate survival. It can't select something that in a million years will be helpful. Can't plan ahead. Also, nature shows a lot of symbiosis, working together rather than fighting. So those are some points here. So only minor variations can be explained by natural selection. So they've never proven that natural selection can get you not just minor variations, but one kind to another kind. Darwin's book was called On the Origin of the Species, but he did not give any evidence for how different kinds originate. Only small changes. So the finch here was still a finch. Didn't change into something else. Bird evolution. This is a fake creature here, of course, and a fake picture. According to evolution, you had a small dinosaur. It started to kind of leap around and eventually became a bird. So here's the bird. All right. For that to happen, you'd have to have a heavy earthbound body that would have to evolve into a lightweight aerodynamic one. Solid bones would have to become hollow bones that are light but strong. Scales would have to become complex flight feathers. You'd have to have a different kind of lung, completely different kind of lung. A different brain for a different environment, be able to sing too, pretty songs, okay? Migrate thousands of miles. A natural selection can't explain any of those changes. It can only explain small variations within species. So going from a dinosaur to a bird is very different than having a slightly different sized beak. A natural selection can only select. It cannot build or create. And this is because it cannot add information to the DNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. And you get your DNA from your parents, passed on from generation to generation. It contains all the information that builds our bodies. Of course, Darwin didn't know anything about DNA. It wasn't yet discovered. We've discovered a lot about it in the last 50 years. Watson and Crick were awarded a Nobel Prize for their discovery of the shape and structure of DNA in 1962. Here's a model of DNA at the Museum of Science in England, London. DNA is very small. You have a very expensive electron microscope to see it. Oh, by the way, I'm related to that guy in the picture. Yeah, that guy there. Yeah, through Noah, yeah, that's right. Okay, so here's a strand of DNA. It's very small, okay. Here's an ant. Ant is much bigger. Electron microscope. Aren't you glad they aren't that big, like walking around? So here's a flea under electron microscope. A guitar string. So each cell has DNA. Here's some cells. We have 10 to 100 trillion cells. Form 300 billion new cells every day, 200 million per minute. Now that is fast. Your skin is continually making new cells, and they can speed up or slow down for that. Each cell is more complicated than a modern city. DNA in one cell holds information equivalent to 1,000 large books at least. So it's your blueprint for designing stuff, like if you wanted to make a doily to wear. It has a designer and a maker here, instructions. So DNA has the instructions to make you, all right? The cell reads it, processes it for the different types of creatures. DNA that is about 3 feet in length and is coiled up so it fits in the nucleus of the cell. It's all coiled together in there, in the chromosomes. Amazing creature. If they took the amount of DNA in each cell in your body and stretched it out, it would be to the sun and back 4 times. So that's pretty amazing. But your DNA has the information to build you or to build a worm or a rose or whatever else. It has the information to build all the organs and stuff. All right. And this DNA information is passed on from generation to generation, and it never makes you a different kind of creature. It never makes the duck into the dog or the dog into you. Okay. But if you were to build something new, grow feathers and wings on a dinosaur, you'd have to change and get new information in the DNA. But natural selection can't do that. It doesn't change your DNA. All right. That's why this picture is a cartoon picture, not a real creature, right? Now, in Darwin's day, they thought, say, if you were a blacksmith, you had strong muscles, you'd pass that on to your sons. You had strong muscles, your son would have strong muscles. Because Jean Lamarck thought the giraffe got its long neck by stretching to reach higher and higher branches. The neck got a little longer, and then it passed it on to the next generation, and then it kept getting longer and longer. But we know that's untrue. So you do not pass on. If you have strong muscles, it doesn't go to your kids because it doesn't change your DNA. If you stretch your muscles, it doesn't change your DNA. So if one giraffe somehow stretched its neck out a little bit, it wouldn't pass it on to the next generation. So this was proven by Weismann. He cut off the tails of 901 mice for 19 generations. But the baby mice always had full tails. So here are the mice. Seriously, Weismann, enough is enough. Right? So they kept cutting off their tails, and the babies still had tails. So obviously they were not passing on their tailless characteristic to the next one. All right? So here we have the finches. So when there was a drought, the finches with larger beaks survived better, but this didn't create the beak. It didn't even create large beaks. The DNA already had the information for the different size beaks. So you're not getting anything new here with natural selection. A natural selection cannot see the future. It cannot work towards a goal. So it would not select something that would not be helpful for the creature's immediate survival. So maybe you're starting to grow a wing. It's not going to help you until you've got the whole thing, right? So Darwin said, we may feel sure that any variation the least degree injurious would be destroyed. So here's a fake thing in an evolutionary museum. So partly formed structures, such as a partial wing, would not make it through. So one creature to another by millions of years, it's not going to happen. So a bird supposedly evolved from a small reptile dinosaur. It's decided to start growing feathers and wings and gradually became a bird. But notice here, so feathers and small wings and a beak here, but it still wouldn't be able to fly. Part wing, but even here, the part bird has 2 fully formed wings here. But for evolution to happen, you'd have to have part of a wing. And that wouldn't help the creature at all, to have 1 leg, 1 wing, or whatever. It'd be a crippled monster. And it can't see that it would actually need to get a full wing to make it here. Also, natural selection requires competition or survival of the fittest. And certainly, we do see competition at times because this is a fallen world. After the fall of man, we started to see death and sin. Sometimes, but there's also a lot of symbiosis, things working together. We see vast interrelatedness. So Charles Towns here, Nobel Prize winning physicist, very special universe we're in here. Remarkable it came out just this way. If the laws of physics were not just the way they are, we couldn't be here. We talked about that already, the fine-tuning. All these laws have to be right the way they are. Paul Davies, on the face of it, the universe does look as if it has been designed by an intelligent creator expressly for the purpose of spawning sentient beings. And we see interconnectedness and symbiosis everywhere, all over the place. So ecological systems, all things working together. Humans and intestinal bacteria. Bacteria are not part of our body, but they actually do things for us which we need to survive. So they synthesize vitamins such as vitamin K, niacin, B-complex vitamins. They actually kill harmful bacteria, the friendly bacteria. Did you know you have more bacterial cells in your body than human cells? Yeah, but they're helpful. They're also smaller too, that helps. Yeah, we probably should have evolved it, but that didn't happen. So for example, bacteria synthesize niacin, which you need in your mitochondria to get energy. Another example, termites and these protozoa. These termites eat wood, but there's parasites in the termites that break down the wood and help the termite keep alive. So if you actually, they've done experiments like the protozoa, you killed the protozoa and the termites eat wood, they're going along fine, and they just drop dead because they can't make it. So the protozoa and the termites can't make it without each other. They both need each other to survive. Acacia tree and acacia ants. The ants live in the tree. The tree gives them food. They give it protection from other herbivores. And the trees can't survive without the ants. So I guess they both evolved at the same time, right? Fish and bacteria flashlight. So there's a flashlight fish that has colonies of luminescent bacteria to pack its light organs. So the fish gives the bacteria food in a stable environment, and the bacteria make it so it can turn its light on. And the fish controls the light by means of a shutter. Open and close the shutter. It's an amazing example of working together. Shrimp and a goby fish. The shrimp helps dig the layer, and they work together. Shrimp builds the tunnels for the fish. And when the shrimp goes outside, it keeps one antenna on the fish. And if there's danger, the fish zooms inside, and the shrimp follows it. So they're working together there. So how all of those things could evolve at the same time is also very difficult to explain, this kind of symbiosis. They call this coevolution, that they evolved at the same time, but they'd have had to evolve like the same generation for it to work. Like, I mean, if the termites can't make it without the bacteria inside, you know, there's all kinds of problems with them. Orchids and their pollinators. So here's this particular type of hummingbird and this orchid, and you can see the bird's beak is designed for that orchid, and so they both fit each other. So they'd have had to both evolve at the same time. For that to work, it's problematic. There's this orchid in Madagascar with an 11-inch nectar tube. So it has 11 inches to go down, and here's a moth that has an 11-inch thing to drink it with. Proboscis, yeah, so 11-inch proboscis. That's pretty amazing. And they filmed it in 2004. So there it is. So there's the 11-inch proboscis. So in one generation, the orchid and the moth evolved. I don't know how that would work. It would be problematic. So this evolution have had to take place at the same time, like instantaneously. And there's a vast amount of genetic information to get the orchid and the moth to operate in this kind of harmony. So to say they just co-evolved is just circular reasoning. Say, well, evolution must have happened, so these must have co-evolved, but that's just an assumption. Okay. Darwin did not realize how perfectly designed everything was at the cellular level. He didn't even know really what cells were. And so there's a lot of ignorance at the time. And so natural selection in Darwin's day was how it was supposed to happen. You have finches and you select the ones that are more fit and so on. But natural selection can only give you minor variations, such as different beak sizes. It cannot build new information because it cannot add information to the DNA. It wouldn't preserve something that's not helpful immediately. And there's a lot of interconnectivity, not just struggle everywhere. So natural selection is an insufficient mechanism to go from goo to you via the zoo. Comments, questions on natural selection? Yeah, so that's not going to make it. That was actually, there's things, Cloud has a good book called Unshakable Faith. It's an apologetics course. He has a good book too called Seeing the Non-Existent, Evolution's Myths and Hoaxes. It's a good book. So that's one problem. Mutation. So natural selection isn't giving you any new information. What about mutations? Maybe mutations can do it. And actually, so in Darwin's day, natural selection was how it was supposed to happen. But in the 20th century, it became obvious, even to evolutionists, that you can't get anything new from natural selection. It can only select things, not make new things. Because the DNA is how things are passed on, natural selection can't influence your DNA. So Lamarck's ideas were disproved. You can't get the short neck of the giraffe to slowly stretch. You have to somehow change the DNA. All right. And so the neo-Darwinian synthesis was combining Darwin's natural selection idea with mutation. So natural selection is now recognized as unable to, on its own, do anything other than select. It can't give you anything new. So now mutations are supposed to give you stuff that's new. Okay. So mutations are now how we're going to go from goo to you via the zoo. All right. What is a mutation? It is a mistake in the genetic and biological process. So it's like if you're building that little doily thing and you have a section that doesn't turn out right on the edge.
Using mutations is a mistake in...
A mutation is a mistake in your genes, okay, or some kind of biological process. It's a mistake. So you make a mistake, and it's supposed to make it better.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure, welcome. So sometimes there are mistakes in the DNA when it's replicating itself or building proteins and so on. And Dawkins here, for example, said mutation is the only way in which new variation enters the species. All that natural selection can do is to accept certain new variations and reject others. So they recognize that mutation is really how you're going to get anything new if it's going to happen here. Now, mutations are either harmful, and if you think if God made us good, it would be expected. They're either harmful or in the short term they're neutral, harmful or neutral. And we'll explain that neutral short-term thing, Lord willing, a bit later. But mutations are also a problematic mechanism to add information. They just mess around with things, and we'll see how that works too. The cell has repair mechanisms to stop mutations, and these fruit fly experiments show that there's limits to what we're going to get with mutations. And it's been predicted that mutations will eventually be discarded as an explanation because they can't do it. So mutations are either neutral in the short term or harmful. And as Dwayne Gish says, very often a mutation proves to be lethal, and they're almost universally harmful. So most mutations, if you think about it, you take something that's well designed and you just make a mistake in it, it's not really going to help it, right? So most of them are going to be harmful here. So they can happen by misreading the DNA, wrong placements in proteins, wrong folding of proteins, lots of other things. So our body is very complex and it has to work well. We've got about 100,000 types of proteins, such as keratin that makes your fingernails. All right. Proteins are made up of strings of amino acids. So there's the evolution. See, they're not friendly. They're amino acids. Large portions, proteins have hundreds of thousands of amino acids. So if you have one skipped or wrongly placed, then you can have a mutation. Okay, so one protein's in the wrong place, you've got yourself a mutation there. Proteins have to have the right shape. Any mistake in that also can cause a lot of problems. So one protein mistake might be compared to the space shuttle. Do any of you remember the Challenger disaster? You do?
Yeah, I remember hearing about it when I was a kid.
When you're a kid? Okay. So the space shuttle had 2.5 million parts. You had to put each one in the right place. In 1983, the space shuttle exploded when one of those parts failed. Hot gas burned through the tank, and it went kablooey. That would be like it was a mutation. There was a mutation on the space shuttle, but it didn't really make it any better. When David Cloud was little, his cousin and he found some wrenches and caused some mutations on his uncle's race car one afternoon. So they caused some mutations on the race car, but it wasn't appreciated, the mutations, all right? So here's an example of mutation, sickle cell anemia. So sickle cell is a blood cell that's misshaped. So the normal blood cell is shaped like a little dish here, and there's a single tiny error in the hemoglobin protein that results in a cell being misshapen, sickle cell. A normal blood cell is the perfect shape to flow through the whole body. You have large arteries and veins, and capillaries are very small. And so here you have arteries in your wrist. That's why doctors check the heart rate there. Sometimes if you haven't gotten enough sleep, maybe you have capillaries seen above your eye. But the blood cells can travel through these capillaries. They're very small. They can fold and bend, and then they bounce back when they get to something bigger. So they're a great shape. The mutated hemoglobin proteins, the sickle cell ones, stick together. And so it doesn't flow through your blood vessels properly. All right? So sickle cell can cause pain, tiredness, infection, organ failure, death. But sickle cell anemia can help fight against malaria. And so it's actually used by evolutionists as an example of a beneficial mutation because the mosquitoes may not want to bite you when they realize that your cells are not right.
It's that the malaria...
They die too. They can die before they can replicate. Yeah. And actually sometimes, depending on the mutations, you can have like some sickle cell, some not. And so it can help prevent that. You know, it can help the malaria not to make it. But overall, it's obviously a harmful thing. This is not, you're not getting anything better by having sickle cells. Even though in the one particular situation, it's temporarily beneficial. If we all had cells that didn't work right, blood cells, this would not be helping you. Dr. Behe actually points out that sickle cell is really about a devolution. It's not constructing anything new or complex, but it's actually a devolution. It's kind of like, imagine if you were in a war and you had a house and you were throwing everything at the enemy. So you took the kitchen sink out, just threw it. You took out the shower head and threw it. You took out the whatever. You're just throwing everything to just survive right now. But your house isn't better without a sink and without other things in there. It's actually making it worse, even if for a very short time there's a limited benefit. So, and actually, they've looked at mutations, and mutations are generally things like this. It's not we're getting a new protein that's coming. We're getting something more complex coming. It's more like this protein stops functioning. Like maybe in one of those birds, this protein that inhibits beak growth might stop working as well to get a bigger beak or whatever. So it's actually, the mutations are actually causing a loss of functionality versus developing new structures. And in certain situations, certain very limited situations, a sickle cell mutation that makes the red blood cell not work as well might help you in malaria, but overall, this isn't helping you become something better. And that's important. So it's corrupting normal functioning of proteins, damage rather than benefit. Mutations are, of course, caused by the fall. We know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. So here's some mutations. Cystic fibrosis. Oh yeah, it was Romans 8:22. Yeah. So incorrect folding of a protein, deletion of a single amino acid, which makes it so that you can't regulate things going across your membrane properly. And it makes it so that you get a thick, sticky mucus in your lungs and digestive organs, makes it difficult for you to breathe, and it results in death by age 37. And before modern medicine, you died a lot younger. Progeria, prematurely old. So this causes rapid aging. So here's a 17-year-old. He looks pretty old. This is a mistake in a protein which forms scaffolding holding the cell together. The mutated protein is called progerin. And everyone has a little bit of it, and it builds up over time, and it's one of the things that make us die. We know the wages of sin is death. It builds up. But this mutation makes it happen a lot faster, so you die a lot faster. So this isn't really helping you here. Here's a mutation of this cow. It had a fifth extra leg up there. Didn't help the cow too much. Mutations don't help. Most of the time they cause pain or death. We have mitochondria in our organelles. They give you energy, your cell's energy. Mitochondrial DNA is the source of many mutations, causes things like different types of cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, stomach, liver, kidney, leukemia, lymphoma. Leigh syndrome, brain disorders. Diabetes, these are mutations. Maternal inherited deafness. What's that? Oh, deafness, yeah. All right. Couldn't hear me? Epilepsy, progressive external ophthalmoplegia. Can't control your eyelids. Increases your heart disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, mutations in the mtDNA. Lots of medical books and websites, you can find lots of descriptions of harmful mutations. They don't have long lists of helpful mutations, though. Do you know why? There aren't any. They don't have long lists of them. So the mutations are not helping here. Mutations aren't adding useful information. You need a lot of additional information to go from a germ to you. So here, you never see any new information arising in a cell. It's hard to see how any serious scientist could believe that real information can arise by itself from nothing. Biophysicist from Johns Hopkins. All mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. So a mutation makes it so that you have less information, not more information. Not even one mutation has been observed that adds little information to the genome. That surely shows that there are not millions upon millions as the theory demands. Failure to observe even one mutation that adds information is more than just a failure to find support for the theory. It is evidence against the theory. So the mutations are actually making you lose information, not gain information. So here's some turtles. If you wanted to go from turtles to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you'd have to have some additional information, right? So you'd have to have a lot of additional information in the genome. Now, but notice now, these are mutants, right? Mutations. But notice these turtles are real. Oh, he's real too. These are real turtles. These are not real. Okay, so these mutations, what? Right? There are no teenage mutant ninja turtles? So that's the type of mutation we don't see happening, okay? Mutations that increase complexity and add information and make you go from turtles. Yeah, we don't see the turtles evolving into teenage mutant ninja turtles. What we do see is mutations making things get worse. So here is a Werner Auerbach, a pioneer in DNA research, received a Nobel Prize in physiology. He said, we've in vain spent much time in search for evolutionary changes, getting mutations to make things better here, adding information. The deeper we penetrate in the studies of genetic exchange, the more we discover a multitude of mechanisms in human genetics that falsify the mutation plus natural selection core of macroevolution. So Darwin's skeptic here, Nobel laureate. So he says that the complex structures of the living cell point to God. So where does the information come from? No answer for among evolutionists. So the top geneticists say it doesn't come through mutations, and we can see that natural selection can't be the source because it doesn't produce anything, just selects. So the information came from the wise creator who put the information in there. We have a certain elasticity in our genetic code so we can adapt to different environments. Like, for example, the human genome, from Adam and Eve, you can have the difference between people that are very, very, very dark-skinned to people that are very light-skinned, because depending on whether you're in Africa, parts of Africa where there's lots of sun, or whether you're in a northern climate where you need to get more sunlight in so that you can produce vitamin E, it actually is more helpful. But that doesn't prove that we're evolving in anything else. So that variety is already in the genome to survive in the different environments, because a good God made it so we can survive different places. Now, bacterial resistance to antibiotics is kind of a big one that evolutionists try to use. So, for example, the Staphylococcus bacterium builds resistance to penicillin, and this shows that evolution is happening here. But there's no new genetic information. You can have things deleted, modified, reshuffled, but you're not having it evolve. The bacterium isn't evolving into a frog or something. It's still a bacterium. And this is an important thing. There's a big difference between small changes within a kind, which is sometimes called microevolution, and there's no dispute about that. There can be small changes within a certain limit, versus kind-to-kind evolution. That's called macroevolution, big changes. That macroevolution has not been what is observed. Small changes within limits has been observed. It's real, and that can't prove that you can get the big changes. There's limits to those small changes. How do the bacteria get immunity? Well, some of them already have immunity within them, and those that survive multiply, while those lacking it die out. That's not changing the bacterium. So, for example, they were able to find bodies of 3 Arctic explorers who died in 1845. And some of them had bacteria in them that were resistant to modern-day antibiotics, even though they didn't exist yet. So those bacteria already had it in there. It's just some of them had it, and now the ones that have it are more likely to survive. So it's just responding to the environment. Sometimes they can gain immunity by actually losing information. So here there's a change in this cell's ribosome. It prevents the molecule from working as well in certain situations. It gives a loss of information. But this loss of information can produce immunity to a certain antibiotic. Okay? So, but that's losing it. You can't keep losing information and evolve into something else. That's going the wrong way. Okay? Do you remember the quote we had from Dawkins at the beginning saying that all creation, if you don't believe in evolution, you're ignorant stork theory? This was a kind of interesting video here. This was, watch this here, 30 seconds. This is really loud. So actually, notice there, and we can go to his next, wait a sec, how do you go to the next slide here? Right. Oops. Right. Anyway, he gave an answer which he actually didn't give an example. But now notice that, and if you want to see what his answer is, you can listen to it. He said something, but it wasn't an answer. So he didn't answer for a long time, and then he asked them to stop recording on the camera so he could think about it. And then when they started recording again, he just said something that actually didn't answer the question. Now, if mutations are a sufficient mechanism, he should have said, okay, here are the top, and he's a smart biologist, Dawkins is a smart guy, he should, okay, here are the top 5 among reptiles of mutations add information, boom, boom. Here are the top 7 among amphibians, boom, 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 boom. Here are the top 10 among insects, boom, boom, boom. But he couldn't give any. Do you think that maybe not wanting to answer questions like that might be the reason he doesn't want to debate creationists? Or is it because they believe in the stork theory? Anyway, so that was very interesting. So mutations are making you lose information, not add. We also have repair mechanisms in our cells that help stop mutations. So the cell would apparently be trying to thwart, by repairing itself, things that are supposed to be making it evolve into something better. So the cell is full of stuff that ensures trying to stop these mutations. So it's trying to stop evolution from happening. Multi-layered proofreading systems in the DNA. So it can even repair its own repair system. So supposedly, why would they? I guess they're evolving the ability to stop their own evolution, stop the mutations. So they're all working very hard to prevent the very thing that supposedly created them. Now, another very serious problem here. Malaria is one of the pathogens that has been studied the most. And we have some hard data here about what can or cannot take place by mutation. Okay, so one of the first, I think it was actually the first treatment for malaria was a drug called chloroquine. Okay, chloroquine. You got malaria, you'd get chloroquine, and you would not die, and that was really nice. Not dying is good. And so that was the first treatment for malaria. Chloroquine was effective in stopping malaria, curing malaria for decades. Okay, so for decades, you got malaria, you got some chloroquine, and you were going to survive. So you were going to do well here. All right. Now, eventually, though, after a number of decades, malaria was able to develop resistance to chloroquine after decades, and billions and billions and billions of malaria cells in malaria pathogens in you and everybody else, billions and billions and billions and billions, they were able to develop, become resistant to chloroquine. Another one that they finally developed then was called atovaquone. Now, atovaquone worked well in a lab, but 1 out of every 3 people that was given atovaquone, the malaria self-developed resistance within 1 person. So much less effective than chloroquine, right? Decades of it working and killing it all versus 1 out of every 3 people developing resistance. What was the difference between the chloroquine and the atovaquone? The difference was for the malaria to become resistant to atovaquone, there was 1 protein binding site that needed to change its structure. All right? And when that happened, atovaquone wasn't able to kill the malaria anymore. And with billions of malaria pathogens, there were enough malaria pathogens in a person that 1 out of every 3, it could actually make it. So it was 1 in 10 to the 20th power. It was able to mutate to develop resistance to atovaquone. Now, why did the chloroquine take so much longer? For the chloroquine mutation to take place, it needed to have 2 protein binding sites change. So 2 mutations versus 1 mutation. That was the difference between decades or 1 out of every 3. All right? So billions and billions and billions of bacteria, or bacteria of malaria pathogens, after decades, there were enough of them to make it so that they were able to mutate twice, and they were able to then select the mutation that gave resistance to the chloroquine. Now, there's a problem here, though. These are multiplied. So that was actually 10 to the 40th power, 10 to the 20th times 10 to the 20th, to get the mutation for the chloroquine. Okay? 10 to the 20th power, 1 out of every 3 atovaquone. 10 to the 40th power, chloroquine. Much bigger number. Now, a single cell, now this actually shows limits to what you can do on mutation. A single cell has 10,000 or so protein binding sites to build molecular machines into function. So if it takes 10 to the 40th power to just get 2, how are you going to get 10,000? That's 10 to the 20th times 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 10 to the 20th, right? This is going to be way too big to make it so that you're going to get where you need to get by mutations. There's only, and now malaria was able to get those 2 because there's so many malaria pathogens. There's huge numbers of malaria pathogens. You might have this huge number in you if you got malaria. But Dr. Behe actually called that 2 mutation likelihood, he called it a chloroquine complexity structure. That's 1 times 10 to the 40th power. Okay? Now, malaria is so small, you could actually, after decades, you could get 2 because they're so small, they were able to mutate twice. But to just get that mutation in all the mammals, now there's obviously mammals are a lot bigger than malaria, right? There's a lot fewer mammals than there are malaria pathogens. So if you took all the mammals that have ever lived according to evolution, according to the long ages, all the mammals that have ever lived, you'd only have a 1 in 100th chance of 1 chloroquine complexity structure mutation. Getting those 2 mutations to change, 10 to the 40th power, you'd have a 1 in 100 chance of just 2, all the mammals that ever lived. But you're going to need a lot more than 2 mutations to get all the mammals that have ever lived. Okay? So mutation can't get you where you need to go because it's just not going to get it because the probability is too small. Okay? We're going to have to stop there for now. Do you get that probability problem for the mutation? 10 to the 20th times 10 to the 20th? It's a big problem. Okay, so Lord willing, we'll wrap that up next time. We're going to take a few of these and then pass around. So please read that, and I encourage you to pass out a few of them by next week and talk to somebody about it. Okay? It's a little tract based on what we've been covering. So what was the first argument for evolution that we looked at today? Starts with an H. Word means same. Homology. So similar structures. The similar structures prove evolution? What is a perfectly reasonable explanation for similar structures? A wheel. Common design. Common design is at least as good an explanation as evolution. What was Darwin's mechanism for evolution taking place? Even in the title of this book. Natural selection. What is the problem with natural selection getting you from goo to UV to zoo? It can't create. It can only select. Mutation. So now they say natural selection plus mutation. Why can't mutations, and we're going to look a little bit more about mutations. Why don't mutations give us sufficient basis for getting from goo to UV to the zoo?
They're either neutral or bad.
They're either neutral or bad, yeah. Just taking, like the way that David Cloud mutated the car didn't help it when he was a kid, okay? So it's not helping you. It's making you lose information, not adding new information. And the probability is so small. The actual hard data, as we saw like with one of the most studied, the malaria pathogen, the probability of getting anything going with it is too small of a probability. So they're either harmful or neutral. And even the neutral ones are only neutral short term. You lose information, not gain information. We don't have helpful mutations. We saw even Dawkins couldn't think of one. And it's just too improbable. Number of mammals that ever lived, 1 in 100 chance of just 2. So, all right. So I think God created the heaven and earth is a better explanation. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, we're thankful for the fact that you made the world. Thank you that we can have our minds agree with what your word says and that we can recognize that it is very accurate and very trustworthy and a much better explanation than man's futile attempts to get out of what your word says. We recognize that your word is true when it says the fool hath said in his heart there is no God, and that you are the creator of the world and it didn't just come about by chance. We thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.